when I work with educators and school leaders and policymakers, it seems like the same issue keeps coming up all the time, and that is cheating. A lot of people are worried about kids using AI to cheat because the fact of the matter is, cheating is really easy with AI, or it can be, depending on the nature of the assignments and the way we approach assessment. It doesn't have to be. So, what we're going to look at in this recording of the webinar presentation is what do we need to have in place and what strategies and approaches can we use to make sure that we are focused on learning and reducing the potential for cheating. This is called Preventing Cheating with AI, but a better title, honestly, is Making Sure That Students Are Learning. Just as an FYI, this is a recording of a live presentation, a live webinar. If you are a subscriber to the EdAI Now newsletter, you get invitations to the live webinar, which means we can talk about your conditions and contexts and questions and so forth. So definitely a better experience. However, I think this topic is so important. It's something that pretty much everybody now in education needs to think about very, very carefully. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do to focus on learning and reduce the potential for cheating. Now, very quickly about EdAI Now, there's our belief statement right there, but really my belief, because I'm EdAI, honestly, is that this is one of those just transformative tools that have hit education, which means teachers can do the same things faster, the same things better, do brand new things they couldn't do before. It means leaders will have the tools and the time to provide instructional leadership and ultimately lead to students getting the opportunities that they need to learn and to succeed. All of that governs what we're going to talk about with cheating, because if this is what we're trying to accomplish, if this is what AI can do, we also have to make sure that it's not being used in such a way to bypass the learning experience for kids. So the first thing we need to do, talk about what is cheating. I read a lot of school and district and organizational AI policies. You know, all these school districts, they have, or universities have, academic integrity policies. But they often don't address the AI issue. So a lot of organizations and schools are starting to build AI policies also. And I've read a lot. They send them to me, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Any gaps? Are we missing anything? And they all seem to say you may not use AI to cheat. But then they don't define what cheating is. So, at a nutshell, cheating means using somebody else's work and calling it your own. Getting our information, getting the work products and the ideas from some other place and not providing appropriate attribution. Saying, this is what I did, but really you haven't. That's what we mean by cheating. And it's really easy to do with AI. So we need to put some things in place. But I often think that our practices as the educators actually promote cheating. That we actually create, in many cases, through our assignments and our assessments, a rationale for kids to cheat. High stakes testing, right? This is a major test. If you don't get this right, you fail. If you don't do this assignment or this paper correct, you're going to fail. Oh, the kid says, I better cheat. Or we don't give them enough time to do the work needs to be done. Or we say, this is an important assignment, now go home and do it. Well, the kid's going to say, I can get some help with this, right? And we emphasize in many ways the results, the production of the work, as opposed to what kids have learned along the way. It's that adage that oftentimes in education, we assess how much kids can do, but not what they can do. So that is going to lead to cheating also. And in many cases, the kids, if they don't feel like they're adequately prepared to do the assignment or do the assessment, they have a natural and justifiable reason to cheat. So, in many ways, we need to look at our approach. What do we think about and how do we use assessment and make sure that our approach not only prevents cheating, but doesn't really even give the kids a reason to cheat? And we turn the focus back on learning. Because the fact of the matter is, kids have always cheated. It's not a new thing. It didn't start with AI. They've always been cheating. It's just a lot easier now. At the same time, everybody's got access to AI, whether it's in their Google Drive with Gemini or just go online and go ChatGPT or whatever the case is. If folks can get online, they have access to AI. So it doesn't really make any sense to tell kids you may not use AI. All that's going to do is drive it underground. And that's a problem, right? Because we want to know what they know. We want to see what they've learned, not how well they can sneak around us to do their assignments. Well, it turns out there are some things that AI can't do. And it's going to provide some opportunities. AI can't think critically. It can't apply the smell test and say, does this actually make sense? It can't build relationships. It cannot take its vast capabilities and resources and say, oh, in this kid's life, here's how we would use this particular learning. So there's some things it can't do, which means we can start looking at a new way to do assessment, and we can revise our assessment strategies, and we can reduce the opportunities for cheating, and we can reinforce learning, because there are some things that only the students can do because AI can't or cannot do it well. All right, so all of that being said, there are 4 main things that need to be in place if we're going to mitigate or prevent cheating. Because it's not just as simple as here's the blue book, write your essay in here and I will take it in sometime over the next month, grade it, and review it. It's not that simple. We need to look at the overall environment in which learning and assessment occurs. And there are 4 things that we can examine. The first 2, what are the policies that are in place? The overall umbrella governing AI use. And how do we define what kids can and cannot do? And when is AI appropriate or not? We're going to look at those 2 briefly. They only have 1 star. The 2 big ones, then, that's going to lead us to our overall approach to assessment. What is the philosophical underpinning to how we assess kids? And are there some specific practices that we can put into place? Actual strategies we can use for assessment that preclude the use of AI. So that's what we're going to look at, the first 2 quickly and the next 2 at a bit more of length. And somehow we're going to get it all done in the next 21 minutes. All right, go. So first, what about those policies? The policies provide the umbrella. They are the definition of what does the organization believe about AI? How are we going to use it? What are we going to use it for? And there are some areas that are specific to the school leadership, the policymakers, the staff, and you see a list right there. When I work with school districts and schools on developing their own policies, that's usually where we start, right there. What's going to apply to the adults in the room? And there are some things that apply to everybody, including the students, which, for example, what do we mean by cheating? And the requirement to cite and explain how AI was used. And very importantly, a definition of what I call the 5 levels of AI use, which are different levels of how AI may be used. We're going to look at that one next. So there are some things that need to be in place so that we can make sure that the students have a clear understanding of the parameters under which they use AI and that there is consistency across the entire environment. That's policies. Now, I mentioned 5 levels of AI use or structured AI. These are the 5 levels, and I've got a full guide on what they are, what they look like, how do we apply them, how do we decide, and so forth. But they go all the way from level 1, which is you may not use AI, through brainstorming, drafting, collaborative creation, and then an actual co-creator, as if the AI is simply another member of the team to produce some product. So there are 5 levels from simplest, none, all the way up to fairly sophisticated use of AI. And it applies to the cheating discussion this way, because when kids understand what's allowed and the teachers can clearly communicate what can you do with AI, then anything above that is not allowed. And we can look at the learning side of assessment, what have the kids learned, but we can also look at the process side of assessment. And this is more around the process side, because we can say on the process, you may do these kinds of things to complete this assignment, but you may not do these other things. And that's the point at which kids move from acceptable use to unacceptable use in the process of producing their assignments and products and assessments. All right. So as I mentioned, we need to be able to clearly define what kids can do, but how does the educator determine which level is appropriate? Well, it comes down to what's the nature of the assignment? What are we trying to accomplish with the assignment or the assessment? And what is the student's capacity to use the AI as well? Now, oftentimes we'll hear teachers say, kids aren't going to use it in my classroom, don't like it, don't care for it, I think it's terrible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we're not going to do it. Well, that's the teacher's bias. The fact is, AI is there, and kids are going to use it. So we need to very carefully and critically think, all right, with this assignment, here's what we're trying to do. Here is the type of assignment. Here's what the students are able to handle in collaborating with the AI. So now this becomes the level of acceptable use. All right, so there's a lot more to say about that. Maybe I'll do a webinar eventually. But in the meantime, I recommend you pop over to our website. The link is there. I've got a full guide on developing AI policies and a full guide on the 5 levels of use. What do they look like and so forth. I think that they're worth taking a look at if you are looking at the question of how do we make sure we're focusing on learning and preventing cheating with AI, because those are going to feed right into the discussion. So go get a copy of those. Now, all that being said, that's setting up the context. But what are we actually going to do? And as I mentioned, the way we think about assessment and the way we approach assessing learning has to be carefully considered before we ever start thinking about actual assessment practices. So what's the philosophy? What are the ideas and the concepts that are going to govern how we go about assessing kids? So I think we've got 5 principles. The first is we need to make sure that our assignments and our assessment are focused on what do kids know, first and foremost, and less and secondarily on how do they go about demonstrating it. It's not the product and the process that's the key important. It's important, but it's not the most important. The first is finding out what kids actually know and can do. The second is the examination of the balance between ongoing assessments, formative assessments versus high stakes. If we have lots of short cycle, brief formative assessments, low stakes, then we can learn what kids know and they don't have a lot of pressure to cheat because they are low stakes. The third has to do with where does the assessment occur? Where does the assignment occur? Where are we actually making the determination of students' ability? If we give kids a test or do this assignment, we'll grade it, it goes in the grade book, go home and do it. Well, we've lost the ability to control that experience and control whether or not kids are doing it themselves and demonstrating their own knowledge, or they're getting some outside help, whether it's the kid next door or dad or AI or just copying stuff out of Wikipedia or whatever the case may be. So what we want to do is we're looking at those assignments. We want to make sure that learning assignments take place outside. Well, they can take place outside the classroom. So anything that goes out of our control goes towards the learning process, helping students to master the content. But if we're going to assess their learning, we do that inside in a proctored environment. So it's not bring your paper back in 2 days and I will see how well you can write. It's work on your papers and so on. We're going to revise them in class. We're going to use it as a part of the learning experience, but in the class where we are proctoring the experience, that's where the assessment occurs. The fourth has to do with application and personalization, which is we need to start looking more at can kids use the information and can they apply it to their own unique experiences? Because that's something that the kids can do, but the AI is not good at. And the fifth principle is to look at multi-stage assignments, multi-stage assessments, where piece by piece we move towards the final product with lots of checks along the way. So multi-stage, so we can clearly show that kids did this, and then later they do this, and we look at it, later they do this. AI doesn't do that well. So that then helps us to focus on the learning and create the experience that is going to be a good demonstration of the student's skills. So those are the 5 principles. Now, if we apply these, if this is our overall take on how we're going to go about assessing kids, then in some degree, whether or not the kids use AI becomes a bit irrelevant. Because the AI use isn't the point here. The process isn't the point. Can they demonstrate what they have learned? We move from the product to an understanding of learning. Not how well did they do the assignment, but through this assignment, can they then demonstrate what they know? And let me give you a couple quick examples, but the main key is this. Our assessment practices need to focus on what kids can do, not so much how do they get to that ability, right? I can go off and write a paper about some topic. Here's my first example. Write a paper about the topic, and you say, okay, you can get some assistance with drafting level 3. Okay, great. And here's your topic. Kid goes off and says, dear ChatGPT, I need a paper on this topic. Okay, and the AI does it. All right, that's part of the learning process. That's outside of our control. But then when the student comes back to class, we say, okay, you've had this learning experience, you've written this paper, you've done a little bit of research, whatever the case is. Now, here are 4 questions, core questions about the topic that you will answer in class. Take your paper, take your pencil, go. And the student is able to explain the topics and demonstrate knowledge. Well, to some degree, it kind of doesn't matter how they got there. Because if they have the AI do the process part for them, but then they used that to learn the content, then does it really matter how they got there? Well, yes and no. No, it doesn't matter because they've demonstrated learning. They've demonstrated knowledge, and that needs to be the focus of assessment. Yes, it matters a little bit because it's not the process that we defined. Well, I will tell you this, not everybody learns the same way. I know that's old news, but it's still true. So when we are judging a student's ability and assessing, are we assessing the process or the fact that the kid has learned and mastered the content? So let's look at another one very quickly. So let's say you've got small teams. They're going to do a little science experiment, write up a lab report, and you say, level 1, no AI. So the students do the experience. They write up all their notes. They feed it into the AI to create a nice lab report. All right. That's the learning process. Then they come to class and they do a little presentation. Here's what we did. Here's how we did it. Here are the conclusions. Here's how we got to the conclusions. The other students or you ask questions, and they are demonstrating mastery of the content. They understand how to do the science and how they got the results, and they can explain all that. That's the assessment piece, right? How they got there is not as important as what they learned when they got there. So we really have to think about that balance very carefully and separate the demonstration of knowledge from the process of getting to that knowledge. Simple way is this. If we are having things out in a non-proctored environment, out of your control, the focus there is on learning. That becomes a learning experience, not an assessment experience. Inside your classroom, in a proctored environment where you're watching them, that's where we do the assessment. So we have to separate those two. Okay, so that's the umbrella. That's the approach. And that's the mindset, which is then going to lead us to actual strategies. What then do we do? Kids have had these experiences. They used or didn't use AI, and they produced or didn't produce something. So what do we actually do to assess them in a way that prohibits the use of AI? What's the technique? Well, overall this is sort of the blanket approach, which is any kind of paper-based, non-digital assignment conducted in a proctored environment, kids can't use AI to cheat. That's probably pretty obvious, right? So if we want the most simple way to prohibit cheating on assessments or on assignments, then they do it on paper in the classroom. But frankly, we can do a lot better than that. So that's going to work every situation. But there's a lot of different ways that kids go about assignments and activities and learning experiences. And there are a lot of different ways that we can assess their knowledge that are far more appropriate than just, here's your paper of the day, do your work. We can group them into 5 major categories: performance, application and transfer, production, and I'll explain all these, metacognition, and iterative strategies. 5 ways that we can craft assignments and build assessments to help students demonstrate their knowledge and ability, and at the same time avoid cheating with AI. So let's take a look at these pretty carefully. So when we talk about performance strategies, basically what this means is students are showing or demonstrating their skills. They are doing some kind of a performance where they are implementing the skills and demonstrating the knowledge. Usually in real time, teachers watching, because we're going to do this in a proctored environment. And there's lots of ways that we can implement performance strategies. Obviously, paper-only quick answers, and that's the example with, here are 4 core questions. Oral defense, where the student has to explain and take questions. Actually demonstrate the skill, or guided practice checks, where you are working with the kids on the learning content and you're observing them. Short answer, station rotations, groups move around the classroom and so forth. Anything where we're asking the kids, show me your work. And anything that requires tangible objects. We call them manipulatives, but where you actually have to create and build something to demonstrate some information. So those are performing their knowledge and performing the skills that they have gained. Performance strategies. Then the second category is application or transfer strategies, which is how do we apply the learning to our own context or to a new context? How do we transfer what we have learned here into this new situation over here? So students are applying knowledge in some kind of a new or authentic context, showing that they understand the information and can use it beyond just regurgitating it. And there's a handful of ways that we can do that, from case studies and applying it to their own lives, or we give them a passage to read and they're responding to some questions. So how well can they do that? Reports, reframing for an audience. That's actually one that I'm kind of interested in personally, just saying that. You learn this stuff. How would you use it with these kids over here? How would you explain this to those students over there? Reframe it for a new audience. The third category is production. They actually make something right here. They actually create something which then they submit for evaluation or assessment. So any kind of tangible products, they create a portfolio, they submit their lab notes, they submit their journals, do quick writes, they provide the artifacts and the pieces that they use to create the final product, as opposed to just turn in your final product and I'll grade it, but show me the pieces that got you there. Or we can also have them design problems for other students or create their own problems and then solve them. So producing something. Metacognition basically means tell me about your thinking, right? Why? It's answering the question, why did you come up with that result? Why do you think that? Why is that right? Explain it to me. Justify it. Interpret it for me. Tell me why you're thinking that way. Defend it. If the AI has done the work for them, they're not going to be able to do this because they didn't do the thinking, obviously. So any kind of strategies where we are asking kids to justify and explain, AI can't do it for them, which means it's going to be a pretty good assessment of that student's own knowledge. So reflections and follow-up, micro conferences, that's where you're sitting down with a kid or a small group of kids and discussing with them, why is this the answer? And tell me how you got there. Debates, seminars, and so forth, because these are things that AI can't do and only kids can do. Iterative strategies are basically multi-step. We're going to draft, we're going to refine, we're going to edit, we're going to improve, we're going to try the problem, we're going to get an answer, we're going to double check our work, we're going to revise it, and so on like that. So anything that has a set of sequences or steps where you, the educator, can provide checks at each point of the process. The AI can't do that for them. They can only do that themselves, and you're monitoring each piece. So any of those strategies where that's the case is going to basically limit the ability to use AI to do their work. Collaborative, in-class, guided practice, any kind of show me your work problems, multi-stage tests. So any of those are going to be very human-specific, and the AI can't do it for them. So they can't cheat, right? So those are the 5 types of strategies with some samples. But I think what we have to have is a good takeaway here, which is with AI being introduced and AI being available, the assessment needs to change. But the focus needs to stay on learning, right? And that's that separation between learning and process. We have to change the way we do things, and we have to change the way we think about assignments and think about assessing kids, because they suddenly have some new tools available to them that make it very easy to pass off the work to the AI. So when we are applying our approaches, the assessments and the assignments can focus on those things that only the student could do. And when we are assessing students and designing assessments, they need to be crafted in such a way that they emphasize what the student and only the student can do. Because when that's the case, there's simply no opportunity to cheat with AI. So this is your thoughts in the live seminar, live webinar discussion, right? But I would love to hear what you think about this. And are you seeing cheating? And what are you trying to do? And do any of these strategies and approaches resonate with you? Is there something new that you might try, I would love to hear about it in the comments. And let's keep building up our understanding as educators, and let's keep building up our pool of strategies that we can apply. So if you have some feedback or some ideas, the comments are the place to put them. All right, a couple things happening in the future. I did mention the policy guide, and the guide on 5 levels is going to be up there on our webpage. I am building currently a full guide about preventing cheating with AI. That should be up there also in about a week's time. Then, if you are a subscriber to the newsletter, we've got some webinars coming up, which you will receive the invite to, but there's the link right there. We've got one specific for principals coming up where we're actually going to use the AI tools to build custom classroom observations and talk about how we use them to strengthen our instructional leadership. We're going to look at how can we use AI for differentiating reading levels. And in February, just thinking a few months in advance, how do we use AI responsibly and avoid bias? So that's all coming up. I hope you will see you at some of those as well. And that is the webinar. We knocked that out in just a hair over half an hour, so hurrah. I appreciate you. I appreciate you sticking with it, because that means that you are committed to student learning. And we're all trying to wrestle with the same question, which is, how do we make sure kids are actually learning those things that we're trying to teach? Thank you for all that you do. I hope you found this useful. Take care.